The Dragon. The epic story of Bruce Lee. The Dragon waits. The air in Hong Kong hung heavy on July 20th, 1973, thick with moisture that clung to skin like an unwelcome second layer. Inside a modest apartment in Kowloon Tong, a man lay motionless on a bed, his breathing shallow, his legendary speed and power reduced to stillness. Outside, the city moved without knowledge of what was unfolding, unaware that the world was about to lose something irreplaceable. In exactly 6 days, a film would premiere in Hong Kong that would change cinema forever. The man on that bed would never see it. Bruce Lee, at 32 years old, had finally broken through every barrier that Hollywood and the world had placed before him. He had fought racism, rejection, and his own physical limitations to become something unprecedented. The first Asian superstar in American cinema. A martial artist who transformed his discipline into high art. A philosopher who made ancient wisdom accessible to modern minds. His film, Enter the Dragon, sat in Warner Brothers' vaults, ready to prove everything he had been saying for years. He had been right all along. They had been wrong, but he would never know. Psychologically belonged to Taiwanese actress Betty Ting Pei. Bruce had gone there earlier that day with producer Raymond Chow to discuss his next project, Game of Death. They talked about the future, about the films he would make, about how Enter the Dragon would open every door that had been slammed in his face. Around 7:30 in the evening, Bruce complained of a headache. Betty offered him Equagesic, a painkiller he had taken before. He took it, went to lie down, and closed his eyes. When Raymond Chow returned hours later and tried to wake him, Bruce Lee was already gone. No one understood how. He was in peak physical condition, a man who could do 100 one-arm push-ups, who ran miles every morning, whose body was a weapon forged through obsessive discipline. His body fat percentage was so low he was essentially carved from stone. Yet here he was, his brain swelling against his skull, his organs shutting down, his extraordinary life ending in a quiet bedroom while the city outside remained oblivious. The doctors would call it cerebral edema. They would point to the painkiller, to an allergic reaction. Others would whisper about cannabis, about the July heat, about his removed sweat glands. 50 years later, medical researchers would suggest his kidneys had failed to excrete excess water. The truth is, nobody really knows what killed Bruce Lee. What we do know is what he left behind. But to understand the magnitude of that loss, to grasp what the world lost when Bruce Lee died, we must go back to the beginning. We must understand the journey that transformed a scrappy kid from the Hong Kong streets into a cultural force that still reverberates today. We must walk the path of the dragon, from the moment his mother first felt him kick in her womb to the moment he took his last breath. This is not just the story of a martial artist or an actor. This is the story of a revolution wrapped in human skin, of a man who refused to accept the world as it was and bent reality to match his vision. This is the story of Bruce Lee.
Born between two worlds.
November 27th, 1940, with its usual morning energy, as Chinese opera star Li Hui-chuen paced nervously outside a hospital room. His wife, Grace Ho, was in labor, and though this was their 4th child, the anticipation never dulled. What Li Hui-chuen did not know, could not have known, was that the child about to enter the world would carry his family name further than any opera performance ever could. The nurses noticed the time, between 6 and 8 in the morning, the hour of the dragon. They checked their calendars. The year of the dragon, according to the Chinese zodiac. A double dragon. The attending nurse, perhaps sensing something special about this squalling infant with his shock of black hair and powerful lungs, suggested an English name to the parents. "Bruce," she said. "It means strong one." Grace Ho named her son Li Jun Fan in Chinese, meaning return again. She had a feeling, perhaps maternal instinct, or perhaps something deeper, that this boy would return to the land of his birth someday. For now, though, Hong Kong awaited. Li Hoi-chuen was in America on tour with the Cantonese Opera Company, and their stay was temporary. 4 months after Bruce's birth, in April 1941, the Li family boarded a ship back to Hong Kong. They could not have known that within months their timing would prove providential. In December 1941, the Japanese military launched a surprise attack on Hong Kong. The occupation would last 4 brutal years. Bruce Lee's first years unfolded against the backdrop of war. The family lived in a cramped 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment in Kowloon, and the space was tighter than anyone would believe. Li Hoi-chuen supported not just his wife and 4 children, but also his deceased brother's widow and her 5 children, following Chinese custom. Servants and their children lived there too. In total, more than a dozen people shared that modest space. Bruce, young and energetic, spent much of his time on the streets, watching the world with eyes that missed nothing. His sister Agnes nicknamed him Little Dragon early on, and the name stuck. Clang. War teaches children different lessons than peace ever could. Young Bruce watched Japanese planes fly overhead and shook his tiny fists at them, shouting challenges in Cantonese that the pilots would never hear. He saw his father continue performing despite occupation forces, saw his mother manage a household of a dozen mouths with diminishing resources. He learned that the world was not always kind, that power mattered, that sometimes survival required fierceness. These lessons would not leave him. Years old, he appeared in his first starring role, a film called The Birth of Mankind. His father's connections in the Hong Kong film industry opened doors, and Bruce walked through them with the unself-conscious confidence of a child who had never been told he could not do something. The camera loved him immediately. There was something magnetic about the boy, an intensity in his eyes that suggested depths no 5-year-old should possess. By the time he was 18, Bruce would appear in more than 20 Hong Kong films, becoming one of the colony's most recognizable child actors. But fame did not make him soft. If anything, it made him hungrier for more. The streets of Hong Kong in the late 1940s and early 1950s were rough, divided by gang territories and economic hardship. Bruce gravitated toward trouble the way water flows downhill. He found the street gangs, or they found him, and soon he was part of that world. He picked fights with British schoolchildren at King George V School when he enrolled at La Salle College at age 12. His brothers said that if Bruce did not like someone, he told them directly to their face, which meant he had no trouble finding trouble. The Hong Kong police began to know his name, and not because of his film roles. His mother Grace grew increasingly worried. Her son was talented, yes, but that talent would mean nothing if he ended up seriously injured or arrested. Li Hoi-chuen shared her concern. They had not brought this child into the world, had not given him opportunities others would never have, just to watch him destroy himself in street brawls before his potential could bloom. Around 1953, when Bruce was 13, he came to his parents with a request. He needed to defend himself at school, he said. He wanted to learn kung fu. Grace and Li Hoi-chuen agreed, perhaps hoping that formal martial arts training would channel their son's aggression into something constructive. They could not have imagined where that decision would lead. They could not have known that when their son walked into the Wing Chun school of Grandmaster Yip Man, he was taking his first step on a path that would change the entire world's understanding of what the human body could become.
The young dragon finds his claws. The boy who entered Yip Man's Wing Chun school in 1953 was not looking for enlightenment or philosophy. Bruce Lee wanted to learn how to hit people harder and defend himself better. He was 13 years old, scrappy, arrogant, and convinced he already knew more than he actually did. The first lesson Yip Man taught him had nothing to do with punches or kicks. It was about emptying the cup. Bruce would spend the next 6 years learning what that meant. Crimson Dun was not like the flowery, acrobatic martial arts that appeared in Chinese opera or films. It was designed for close-quarters combat, for urban fighting where there was no room for high-flying kicks or elaborate forms. The style had been developed, according to legend, by a woman named Yim Wing Chun, which meant it prioritized efficiency over strength, technique over power. Yip Man taught that the shortest distance between 2 points was a straight line, and that philosophy would become core to everything Bruce later developed. But in those early years, Bruce was just another student, though one who showed up with the enthusiasm of the obsessed. His training partners remember him as relentless. Where other students might practice a technique 50 times, Bruce would practice it 500. He carried a small wooden dummy around with him, practicing strikes whenever he had a spare moment. His knuckles became calloused, his reflexes sharpened. But more importantly, something in his mind began to change. He started to see patterns, to understand that martial arts was not just about memorizing movements, but about understanding principles. The human body moved in certain ways, physics dictated certain outcomes, and if you understood the underlying truth, you could transcend the specific technique. Yip Man recognized something in this intense teenager. The Grandmaster was in his 60s by then, a master of Wing Chun who had seen countless students pass through his school. Most wanted to learn to fight. A few wanted to understand. Yip Man saw in Bruce Lee a student who might do both if the boy's arrogance did not destroy him first. He began to teach Bruce not just techniques, but concepts. He spoke about centerline theory, about economy of motion, about how a smaller person could defeat a larger opponent through superior understanding. Bruce absorbed everything like a sponge, his mind racing ahead to implications Yip Man had not yet explained. But Bruce was still Bruce. The street fighting did not stop. If anything, his Wing Chun training made him more confident, more willing to test his skills in real combat. He continued running with street gangs, continued getting into trouble. His parents' worry deepened. Then something happened that neither films nor martial arts could explain. Bruce Lee discovered dance. Specifically, he discovered the cha-cha, and he became obsessed with it. Room dancing and street fighting seemed to occupy opposite ends of human activity. But Bruce saw the connection immediately. Dance required footwork, balance, rhythm, and timing. So did fighting. Dance required you to feel your partner's movement and respond instantly. So did fighting. Dance required thousands of hours of practice to make movements smooth and effortless. So did fighting. In 1958, at age 18, Bruce Lee won the Hong Kong Cha-Cha Championship. He kept detailed notebooks of the steps, more than 100 variations, treating the dance with the same seriousness he brought to Wing Chun. Years later, when he moved with supernatural speed and fluidity in his films, part of what audiences were seeing was those thousands of hours of dance training, that deep understanding of how the body moves through space. But all the dancing and all the martial arts could not save Bruce from himself. The street fighting finally caught up with him in a way that could not be ignored. He beat up the son of a powerful figure in Hong Kong, and suddenly his parents were facing a very real possibility that their son might end up in serious legal trouble, or worse. The decision they made changed everything. In April 1959, with $100 in his pocket and a one-way ticket on a steamship, 18-year-old Bruce Lee left Hong Kong for Seattle, Washington. His parents hoped America would give him a fresh start, help him mature, keep him out of the trouble that seemed to find him in Hong Kong. Bruce, what he could not see, was that his parents had just given him the greatest gift they possibly could. They had sent him to the country of his birth, the land where an energetic teenager with big dreams and bigger talent could become anything he wanted to be. They had sent him to America. And America, whether it knew it or not, was about to meet Bruce Lee. The Way of Wing Chun. Before we follow Bruce across the Pacific, we must understand what Yip Man gave him during those 6 years of training from 1954 to 1959.
Wing Chun is deceptively simple. It has only 3 hand forms and 1 wooden dummy form. Compared to the elaborate systems of other Chinese martial arts with their dozens of forms and hundreds of techniques, Wing Chun seems almost minimalist. But that simplicity conceals extraordinary depth. The system teaches simultaneous attack and defense. When someone throws a punch at you, you do not block and then counter. You deflect while you strike, turning your defensive movement into an offensive weapon. This requires precise angles, impeccable timing, and a level of body awareness that takes years to develop. Yip Man taught Bruce to work from the center line, an imaginary line running vertically through the middle of the body. Control the center line, control the fight. He taught him Chi Sao, or sticky hands, a training method where 2 practitioners maintain contact with their forearms and learn to feel their opponent's intentions through touch rather than sight. In Chi Sao, you cannot fake. Your body reveals your intentions before your mind does. Yip Man also taught something less tangible but equally important, the philosophy of no mind. This was Zen Buddhism filtered through martial arts, the idea that true mastery came not from thinking about techniques, but from moving beyond conscious thought entirely. The body had to know what to do without the mind interfering. Thought was too slow. In a real fight, by the time you thought about what technique to use, you had already been hit. The goal was Wu Wei, effortless action, responding to attack as naturally as a tree bends in wind. Bruce absorbed these lessons with the intensity he brought to everything. His senior classmates remember him questioning everything, not out of disrespect, but because he genuinely wanted to understand the why behind every movement. Yip Man tolerated this, even encouraged it in Bruce's case, because the master recognized that this student might go beyond Wing Chun itself. The danger, Yip Man warned, was becoming trapped by any system. The map is not the territory, the menu is not the meal. Wing Chun was a tool, not the truth itself. These philosophical foundations would become the bedrock of everything Bruce later built. When he criticized traditional martial arts for being too rigid, too bound by forms, he was not dismissing them. He was applying what Yip Man had taught him. No system should become a prison. The highest level of martial arts was no fixed form, constant adaptation, responding to what is rather than what you think should be. This was Wing Chun's gift to Bruce Lee, not just the trapping hands and chain punches, but the understanding that all systems were temporary scaffolding to be discarded once you reached the roof. But in 1954, Bruce was still a teenager, learning the basics, absorbing everything with the hunger of someone who sensed they were made for something more than ordinary life. The wooden dummy bore the marks of his 10,000 strikes. His arms became covered in bruises from Chi Sao training. His hands developed a calloused toughness that would never completely leave them. And somewhere in those years, beneath the teenage bravado and street-fighting exterior, a philosopher began to emerge. He started reading voraciously. Chinese classics, Western philosophy, books on physics and biomechanics. His mind was as hungry as his body. When Bruce boarded that ship to America in April 1959, he carried more than $100 and some clothes. He carried 6 years of Wing Chun training, the beginning of a philosophical framework that would revolutionize martial arts, and an unshakable belief that he was destined for greatness. The Pacific Ocean stretched before him, 3 weeks of rough seas and cramped quarters before reaching San Francisco. He spent much of that journey teaching cha-cha to wealthy passengers, earning money and making connections. Even then, Bruce Lee could not stop teaching, could not stop moving. The dragon was crossing the ocean, and nothing would ever be the same. American soil, foreign ground. Bless. Seattle in 1959 was a different world from Hong Kong. The streets were wider, cleaner, emptier. The air tasted different. Bruce arrived with an address for Ruby Chow's restaurant, a family friend who had agreed to give him work and a place to stay. Ruby Chow was a formidable woman, one of the first Chinese Americans to serve on the King County Council, and she did not tolerate laziness or excuses. Bruce lived in a small room above the restaurant and worked as a busboy, clearing tables and washing dishes. It was humbling work for a film star from Hong Kong, but Bruce needed to eat and sleep somewhere, and pride was a luxury he could not afford. He enrolled at Edison Technical School to finish his high school education, studying at night after his restaurant shifts. His English improved rapidly, losing none of the confidence, but gaining the grammar and vocabulary he would need to navigate American society. The teachers noticed this unusual Chinese student, who seemed older than his years, who asked probing questions in broken English, who radiated an intensity that made them remember him long after he graduated. In 1960, Bruce enrolled at the University of Washington, declaring philosophy as his major. It was a natural fit. His mind craved understanding, wanted to know not just how things worked, but why they worked. At the university, Bruce Lee truly began to blossom. He rented a room and started teaching kung fu to fellow students, giving private lessons to earn money while attending classes. Word spread quickly. There was a Chinese student who could do extraordinary things with his body, who taught a martial art nobody had heard of, whose demonstrations left audiences gasping. Bruce put up flyers advertising his classes, breaking with the tradition that Chinese martial arts should only be taught to Chinese students. Yip Man had done this to some extent, but most traditional masters guarded their knowledge jealously. Bruce rejected that entire mindset. Knowledge hoarded was knowledge wasted. If someone wanted to learn, Bruce would teach them. His first student was an African-American man named Jesse Glover, who saw Bruce demonstrating techniques at a parking garage and immediately asked to learn. Bruce agreed without hesitation. Soon others followed: white students, black students, Latino students, Asian students. Bruce welcomed everyone. He charged money for lessons because he needed to survive, but he never turned away anyone who showed genuine dedication. This was revolutionary in 1960s America, where racial boundaries were still rigidly enforced in many areas. Bruce's martial arts classes became small laboratories of integration, places where a Japanese American might train alongside a white businessman, alongside a Native American student. What mattered was not your race or background. What mattered was your willingness to empty your cup and learn. In 1963, Bruce opened his first official school, the Jun Fan Kung Fu Institute in Seattle. Jun Fan was his Chinese name, and Kung Fu was his anglicization of Kung Fu. The school was small, more of a garage space than a proper studio, but it was his. He taught Wing Chun, modified by his own growing understanding, already beginning to experiment with techniques from other martial arts. He studied Western boxing and incorporated its footwork. He examined fencing and adopted elements of its strategy. His students were learning Wing Chun, but they were also learning something that did not yet have a name. It was at the university that Bruce met Linda Emery. She was a white student, born in Spokane, Washington, interested in Asian philosophy and culture. She enrolled in Bruce's Kung Fu class, attracted by the exotic nature of Chinese martial arts, and, increasingly, by the instructor himself. Bruce was unlike anyone she had ever met. Intense, charismatic, overflowing with energy and ideas. He talked about philosophy and martial arts as if they were the same thing, spoke about emptying your mind and filling your heart. Linda fell in love gradually, then suddenly. Their relationship was not simple. This was 1963, and interracial relationships were still controversial, especially in the Pacific Northwest. Many states still had laws forbidding interracial marriage, though the Supreme Court would strike those down in 1967 with Loving v. Virginia. Linda's parents were not pleased. Bruce was Chinese, he was a martial arts instructor, he had no clear career prospects, and he wanted to marry their daughter. But Linda was certain, and Bruce was certain, and love has a way of making difficult things seem simple. They married on August 17, 1964. Linda's mother attended the wedding, Her father did not. The marriage was a statement, though neither of them probably saw it that way at the time. They were just two people in love. But they were also living proof that the racial boundaries American society tried to enforce were artificial, arbitrary, and ultimately meaningless. Bruce had married outside his race, outside his culture. He lived in a world of his own making, where the only thing that mattered was what you could do and who you chose to become. This would be a theme throughout his life, refusing to accept limitations other people tried to impose on him. On February 1st, 1965, Linda gave birth to their first child, a son they named Brandon Bruce Lee. 1 week later, news arrived from Hong Kong that Lee Hoi Chuen had died. Bruce was pleased his father had known about the birth of his grandson, had known the Lee family line would continue. But the grief was complicated. Lee Hoi Chuen had sent Bruce to America as punishment and gift, exile and opportunity. They had not always understood each other. Now they never would. Bruce mourned, then did what he always did. He threw himself into work. He had a family now, he needed to provide. Kung Pen demonstrating, continued building his reputation. 1964, at the Long Beach International Karate Championships, Bruce gave a demonstration that changed his life. He showcased his 1-inch punch, his 2-finger push-ups, his incredible speed. In the audience was hairstylist Jay Sebring, who happened to mention Bruce to television producer William Dozier. Dozier was developing a new show called The Green Hornet, and he needed an actor to play the masked sidekick, Kato. He invited Bruce to Los Angeles for a screen test. Bruce flew down, performed his martial arts for the camera, demonstrated his intensity and charisma, and flew back to Seattle. He had no idea if anything would come of it. Weeks passed, then months. Then, in 1965, William Dozier called. He wanted Bruce for the role. He was offering Bruce Lee a chance at Hollywood. Bruce packed his family's belongings, said goodbye to his students in Seattle, and moved to Oakland, California, then to Los Angeles. He thought this was his big break. He thought Hollywood was ready for him. He had no idea how wrong he was. The Green Hornet and Hollywood's Iron Gate. The Green Hornet premiered on ABC in September 1966, and for one glorious season, Bruce Lee was on American television every week. He played Kato, the masked driver and martial arts expert who served as sidekick to the crime-fighting Green Hornet. The show was conceived as ABC's answer to Batman, hoping to capture lightning twice. It did not work. The Green Hornet was cancelled after just one season, 26 episodes, ending in March 1967. But those 26 episodes changed everything for Bruce Lee, though not in the way he hoped. Bruce had reservations about the role from the beginning. Kato was a Chinese manservant, and Bruce was acutely aware of the stereotypes that plagued Asian characters in American entertainment. Before signing, he told producer William Dozier directly that he would not accept any pigtail and hopping around jazz, would not play into the Charlie Chan stereotypes that had dominated Hollywood for decades. To Dozier's credit, he agreed. Kato was allowed to be competent, skilled, even cool. But Kato was still a sidekick. The title character was a white man, played by Van Williams, and no matter how amazing Bruce's fight scenes were, he was not the star. Is that Bruce stole the show anyway. His martial arts were unlike anything American television had ever seen. When Kato fought, it was not the staged, theatrical combat that appeared in westerns. It was fast, brutal, efficient. Bruce moved like water given form, striking 3 times before his opponents could react once. Children across America did not want to be the Green Hornet. They wanted to be Kato. In Hong Kong, when the show was broadcast, they renamed it The Kato Show. Bruce was paid $400 per episode. Van Williams received $2,000. After the show's cancellation, Bruce expected Hollywood to come calling with new offers. He was a proven talent with a built-in fan base, a martial artist who could actually fight, an actor with undeniable charisma. The phone barely rang. He got a few guest appearances on television shows, a small role in the 1969 film Marlowe, where he destroyed an entire office through kickboxing and karate. But the leading roles he expected never materialized. Casting directors told him he was too Chinese, his accent was too thick, American audiences would not accept an Asian leading man. The same industry that had embraced Charlie Chan, a Chinese detective played by white actors in yellowface, suddenly found an actual Chinese actor too Chinese for their tastes. The rejection ground on him. Bruce fell into depression, questioning whether he had made the right choice leaving Hong Kong, wondering if Hollywood would ever see past his race. He supported his family by teaching martial arts to celebrities: Steve McQueen, James Coburn, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. These were prestigious clients, and the money helped. But Bruce had not moved to Los Angeles to be a kung fu instructor to movie stars. He wanted to be a movie star himself. Then came the betrayal that hurt most of all. Bruce had been developing an idea for a television series called The Warrior, later conceptualized with screenwriter Sterling Siliphant as the Silent Flute. The premise was a Chinese Shaolin monk wandering through the American Old West, using martial arts and Eastern philosophy to solve problems. Bruce envisioned himself in the lead role, finally getting to showcase everything he had to offer: his martial arts, his philosophy, his screen presence. He pitched the show to Warner Brothers and other studios. They loved the concept. They thanked him for his contribution. Then they went ahead and developed Kung Fu, starring David Carradine, a white actor, as the Chinese Shaolin monk. The excuse was that Bruce was too Chinese for American audiences. David Carradine looked vaguely Asian in the right lighting, knew no martial arts, and could be more easily marketed to Middle America. To add insult to injury, Kung Fu became a hit, running for 3 seasons and making Carradine a star. Bruce had handed Hollywood a groundbreaking concept on a silver platter, and they had taken it from him, whitewashed it, and made money from his idea without him. Linda later said the news devastated Bruce more than anything else in his career. It was proof, undeniable proof, that no matter how talented he was, Hollywood would never see him as more than a sidekick. The racism was systemic, subtle, and absolutely effective. In the 1960s and early 1970s, Hollywood was not ready for an Asian leading man. The stereotypes were too deeply embedded. Asian men were either evil Fu Manchu villains or emasculated comic relief like Charlie Chan. There was no template for a strong, sexual, heroic Asian male protagonist. Bruce was trying to create that template from nothing, and the industry pushed back at every turn. He gave private lessons to actors who would go on to play Asian characters with more authenticity because Bruce taught them. He choreographed fight scenes that revolutionized action cinema, but his own face was deemed too ethnic for leading roles. The experience hardened Bruce in ways both good and bad. He became more determined, more certain that he would prove Hollywood wrong. But it also made him defensive, sometimes combative. He knew he was better than the opportunities he was being given. He knew he could outfight, outact, and outwork almost anyone in the industry. But talent was not enough. Not when the system itself was designed to keep people like him in subordinate roles. Spring in 1971, after Wall, Bruce made a decision. If America would not give him the opportunities he deserved, he would go back to Hong Kong. He would make films there, prove his worth, and force Hollywood to come to him. Linda supported the decision, despite the difficulty it would mean for their family. They had 2 children now. Shannon, Lee was born in 1969, but they believed in Bruce's vision, believed he was destined for something greater than playing sidekicks and giving martial arts lessons. Bruce Lee was going home, and Hong Kong was about to explode. Forging a new path. Jeet Kune Do. Before we follow Bruce back to Hong Kong, we must understand the philosophical and martial revolution he engineered during those frustrating years in America. The Bruce Lee who left Hong Kong in 1959 was a Wing Chun practitioner. The Bruce Lee who returned in 1971 was something else entirely. The founder of Jeet Kune Do, a martial arts philosophy that would reshape combat sports forever. The catalyst came in 1964, shortly after Bruce opened his Oakland school. Word spread through the traditional Chinese martial arts community that this young upstart was teaching kung fu to non-Chinese students, violating centuries of tradition. A group of Chinatown kung fu masters sent an ultimatum: fight our best fighter, and if you lose, shut down your school. If you win, you can teach whoever you want. The fighter's name was Wong Jack Man, a skilled martial artist trained in multiple systems. Bruce accepted the challenge. Fight took place in Bruce's Oakland school, witnessed by a small group including Linda. Accounts vary on exactly what happened, but by Bruce's own telling, the fight lasted 3 minutes and involved him chasing Wong Jack Man around the room until forcing a submission. Bruce won, clearly and decisively. He had proven he could teach whomever he wanted, but the fight gnawed at him for a different reason. It had taken 3 minutes, and Bruce felt it should have taken seconds. He had been winded afterward, not in peak condition. He had relied too heavily on Wing Chun techniques that proved less effective in a chaotic real fight. This dissatisfaction became the spark for everything that followed. Bruce began a period of intense study and experimentation that would last the rest of his life. He read everything he could find on martial arts: Western boxing, fencing, wrestling, philosophy, biomechanics, kinesiology. He studied how the body generated power, how neural pathways created speed, how different fighting ranges required different strategies. He practiced constantly, testing theories on heavy bags and live opponents, discarding what did not work, keeping what did. His notebooks from this period reveal a mind that never stopped questioning, never stopped refining. Bruce concluded that traditional martial arts were too bound by form and tradition. They taught techniques as if they were sacred scrolls that could not be questioned. They made students memorize hundreds of movements without understanding the principles behind them. They prepared students for ritualized combat that bore no resemblance to real fighting. As Bruce famously said, traditional martial arts competitions were dry land swimming. You could practice all day, but if you fell into water, those movements would not save you. What Bruce wanted was something alive, something that responded to reality rather than tradition. He began calling his approach Jeet Kune Do, a Cantonese phrase meaning the way of the intercepting fist. Name came from fencing, where intercepting your opponent's attack was more efficient than blocking and then countering. But Bruce immediately regretted giving it a name at all. By naming it, he worried he was creating just another system, another box that would limit practitioners. Jeet Kune Do is just a name, he wrote, a boat to get one across, and once across it is to be discarded, not to be carried on one's back. The philosophy of Jeet Kune Do could be summarized in a few core principles, though Bruce would bristle at reducing it to principles at all. First, simplicity. Remove the ornamental, keep only what works. Second, directness. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Third, freedom. Adapt to your opponent, the situation, the moment. Do not try to impose a predetermined style on chaos. Fourth, constant evolution. What works today may not work tomorrow, so never stop learning and refining. Bruce rejected the idea of fighting styles entirely. He said the best fighter was not a boxer, not a karate master, not a wrestler, but someone who could adapt to any style, someone who was formless. Be like water, he told his students, in what would become his most famous teaching. Water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend. Water takes the shape of whatever container holds it, but never loses its essential nature. It adapts without losing itself. That was the goal. Complete adaptation while maintaining complete integrity.
Plunged Kundo incorporated techniques from everywhere. Bruce trained in boxing with legendary trainer Freddie Roach's predecessor at the Wild Card Gym. He studied fencing and adopted its footwork and timing. He examined wrestling and judo for their grappling techniques. He broke martial arts down into 4 ranges of combat: kicking, punching, trapping, and grappling. A complete fighter, Bruce argued, had to be effective in all 4 ranges. You could not just be a kicker who fell apart at close range. You could not just be a grappler who got knocked out before closing the distance. This philosophy predated mixed martial arts by decades. When UFC President Dana White called Bruce Lee the father of mixed martial arts, he was acknowledging that Bruce had seen the future of combat sports before anyone else. Psychologist Jeet Kune Do was never just about fighting. Bruce saw it as a philosophy of life. The same principles that made you an effective fighter made you an effective human being. Adaptability, constant learning, removing what was useless, adding what was your own. Using no way as way, having no limitation as limitation, Bruce wrote. This was not empty mysticism. It was practical advice for living in a complex world. Do not let other people's expectations or traditions limit your potential. Do not let your own past decisions trap your future. Flow like water. Adapt. Evolve. Bruce's students from this period described training unlike anything else available in American martial arts. There were no uniforms, no bowing to pictures of ancestors, no spending years learning forms before being allowed to spar. Bruce started students hitting pads and sparring immediately. He wanted them to experience real combat, real chaos, real adaptation. He taught them to think, to understand why a technique worked rather than just memorizing it. He pushed them physically harder than they thought possible, then pushed them harder still. "I'm not trying to make you a fighter," he told them. "I'm trying to help you express yourself honestly through martial arts." The training extended beyond just fighting skills. Bruce began incorporating Western strength training into his regimen, which was heretical in traditional martial arts circles at the time. Most traditional masters believed weight training would make you slow and muscle-bound. Bruce proved them wrong by becoming stronger, faster, and more explosive through intelligent strength training. He studied anatomy and kinesiology to understand how muscles generated force. He experimented with isometric training, with high-intensity circuits, with core conditioning. His body became a laboratory where he tested every theory. If it worked, he kept it. If it did not, he discarded it, regardless of how traditional or popular it was. By the late 1960s, Bruce had developed a complete system of physical and philosophical training that was decades ahead of its time. But Hollywood would not let him share it with the world. He had the knowledge, the skills, the philosophy, and the charisma. What he did not have was the opportunity. That was about to change, but not in America. Bruce Lee was going to have to leave the country of his birth to prove what he had known all along. He was revolutionary. Homecoming of the Prodigal Dragon. When Bruce Lee stepped off the plane in Hong Kong in 1970, he had not starred in a major film role in over a decade. In Hollywood, he was a television has-been, the guy who played Kato for one season and then faded into obscurity. He was 30 years old, had a wife and 2 young children to support, and no clear prospects. The trip was meant to be temporary, a visit to see family and explore possibilities. What Bruce discovered shocked him. In Hong Kong, he was famous, enormously famous. The Green Hornet had been broadcast throughout Asia, but it was marketed differently. Where American audiences saw a show about the Green Hornet, Asian audiences saw The Kato Show, with Bruce as the star. His fight scenes were the highlight, the reason people tuned in. His Wing Chun and modified Kung Fu techniques were unlike anything they had seen on screen. Hong Kong audiences remembered him as a child actor, but saw him now as something new, a Chinese martial artist showing the world what Chinese martial arts could be.
He was greeted at the airport by producers and agents eager to work with him. The offers started immediately. Raymond Chow, a producer at Golden Harvest Studios, made Bruce an offer he could not refuse. Golden Harvest was willing to give Bruce lead roles, creative control, and a chance to showcase his martial arts on film properly. The money was not enormous, but it was steady work, and more importantly, it was respect. Bruce was not being asked to be a sidekick. He was not being told he was too Chinese for leading roles. In Hong Kong, being Chinese was not a liability. It was the entire point. Bankake's Bruce went back to Los Angeles, talked it over with Linda, and made one of the most important decisions of his life. They would move to Hong Kong. Linda would have to navigate being a white woman in a Chinese city. Her children would grow up in a culture foreign to her. But she believed in her husband, believed he needed this chance. In 1971, the Lee family relocated to Hong Kong. Bruce signed with Golden Harvest. The first film was called The Big Boss. The Big Boss was not high art. The plot was simple. Bruce played a simple country worker who discovers his boss is running a drug smuggling operation. When his friends are killed, Bruce's character finally breaks his promise to his mother not to fight and unleashes his fury. The film's climax featured Bruce destroying everyone in sight, his martial arts displayed in a way Hong Kong cinema had never quite seen before. It was raw, fast, brutal, and absolutely electrifying. The film premiered in October 1971 and shattered every box office record in Hong Kong. Audiences had never seen martial arts depicted with this level of speed and ferocity. Bruce Lee was not just a star, he was a supernova. Golden Harvest rushed to capitalize on the success. The second film, Fist of Fury, appeared in early 1972 and was even more successful than The Big Boss. In this film, Bruce played Chen Zhen, a student returning to his martial arts school in Shanghai to find his master has been poisoned by members of a rival Japanese school. The film was set during the Japanese occupation of China, and its themes of Chinese pride and resistance resonated deeply with Hong Kong audiences, still processing their own complicated history with Japanese occupation. Fist of Fury contains what might be Bruce Lee's most powerful scene on film. Chen Zhen arrives at a park where a sign reads, "No dogs and Chinese allowed," a horrific reminder of colonial racism. In a cathartic explosion of fury, Bruce's character destroys the sign and fights everyone who tries to stop him. It was Bruce using film to say what he had felt his entire life, that Chinese people deserved dignity, respect, and equal treatment. That Asians were not inferior, were not sidekicks, were not emasculated stereotypes. The scene made Bruce Lee a cultural icon throughout Asia, a symbol of resistance against racism and colonialism. But Bruce was not content to just star in other people's films. He wanted total creative control, wanted to write, direct, produce, and choreograph his own vision. For his third film, The Way of the Dragon, Bruce's own production company, Concord Production Inc., took the lead. Released in 1972, the film was written, produced, directed, choreographed, and starred Bruce Lee. It was a remarkable display of his abilities across every aspect of filmmaking. The Way of the Dragon featured a climactic fight scene between Bruce and Chuck Norris, set in Rome's Colosseum, and it remains one of the most iconic fight sequences ever filmed. Bruce choreographed the fight to showcase both men's abilities, making Chuck Norris a genuine threat while demonstrating Bruce's superior skills and philosophy. The fight was not just punches and kicks. It was a conversation between two different martial arts approaches, with Bruce's adaptability ultimately triumphing over Chuck's more rigid style. The film was another massive success, cementing Bruce as not just a martial artist or an actor, but a complete filmmaker. In 3 films, what Hollywood had refused to let him do in a decade. He had proven that an Asian man could be a leading man, a sex symbol, a hero, and a box office draw. The films played throughout Asia and started breaking into Western markets. Suddenly, the Hollywood executives who had rejected Bruce for years were noticing. Warner Brothers approached Golden Harvest about a co-production, a joint venture that would give Bruce the Hollywood budget and distribution he had always wanted while filming in Hong Kong with his creative team. The result would be Enter the Dragon, and it would change everything. But there was a darker side to Bruce's sudden success. The work was relentless. He was starring in films, choreographing every fight, often directing even when not credited, promoting the films, and trying to be a husband and father. His training schedule remained intense. He ran every morning, lifted weights 3 times a week, practiced martial arts daily, and pushed his body with the same obsessive intensity he brought to everything else. Something had to give. The human body, no matter how perfectly conditioned, has limits. Bruce Lee was about to discover his. Enter the Dragon. The door opens. In late 1972, Warner Brothers and Golden Harvest announced their groundbreaking co-production. The film was called Enter the Dragon, with a budget of $850,000, which was substantial for a martial arts film, but tiny by Hollywood standards. The premise was straightforward. Bruce would play a Shaolin martial artist recruited by British intelligence to infiltrate a martial arts tournament held on a private island. The tournament's host is a former Shaolin monk turned crime lord who uses the event to cover his drug trafficking and prostitution operations. Bruce's character has a personal stake. The crime lord's bodyguard killed his sister. Camouflage, it was a B-movie, a martial arts film with James Bond trappings. But Bruce saw it as more. This was his chance to show Hollywood and the world everything he had been trying to say for years. This was his opportunity to be an Asian leading man in a Hollywood production, to showcase martial arts properly, to inject philosophy and meaning into what could have been just another action film. Bruce approached Enter the Dragon with the intensity of a man who knew this might be his only shot. The production was not easy. Director Robert Clouse and writer Michael Allin had their own vision for the film, which sometimes conflicted with Bruce's ideas. Bruce pushed for script changes constantly, ensuring that his character remained the hero, not just one of several equal protagonists. He fought to keep the film authentic to Chinese culture and martial arts philosophy, pushing back against Western stereotypes and shortcuts. He demanded rewrites of scenes he felt were too derivative or disrespectful. The producers sometimes found Bruce difficult to work with, not understanding that for Bruce, this was not just another movie. This was his legacy. Bruce choreographed all the fight scenes himself, as he had in his Hong Kong films. The difference was that Warner Brothers gave him better production values, better equipment, and a bigger stage. The fight sequences in Enter the Dragon showcase the full evolution of Bruce Lee's martial arts cinema philosophy. Each fight has its own rhythm and purpose. The opening scene demonstrates Bruce's philosophy to a student, using a sparring match to teach about emotional content and not thinking, but feeling. The fights in the tournament showcase different martial arts styles, with Bruce adapting to each opponent. The final battle in Han's Mirror Room is a masterpiece of cinematography and choreography, Bruce fighting multiple versions of himself reflected in mirrors, reality and illusion blurring. That mirror room scene almost did not happen. It would add $8,000 to the budget, and Warner Brothers initially resisted. But Bruce insisted, and Anne Klaus, the director's wife who was in charge of props, found a way to make it work. The scene took 2 days to film and became one of the most iconic sequences in martial arts cinema. Decades later, Mirror Room Fight remains instantly recognizable, copied and homaged in countless films and television shows. But during filming, Bruce's body began sending warnings he ignored. In May 1973, while doing automated dialogue replacement work at Golden Harvest Studios, Bruce collapsed. He complained of severe headaches, became disoriented, and lost consciousness. He was rushed to Hong Kong Baptist Hospital, where doctors diagnosed cerebral edema, swelling of the brain. They administered mannitol, which reduced the swelling, and Bruce recovered. The doctors were concerned and recommended Bruce take time off, reduce his stress, and get comprehensive medical evaluation. Bruce went to UCLA Medical Center for a full workup. The doctors found nothing conclusive, but warned him about his extremely low body fat percentage and potential vulnerability to drugs or extreme physical stress. Bruce ignored most of the advice. He had too much to do. Enter the Dragon was finished, but needed promotion. He was already planning his next film, Game of Death, which would feature his famous yellow tracksuit and a fight sequence with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He was meeting with Hollywood executives about future projects. Everything was finally coming together. The doors that had been locked were opening. After years of rejection and frustration, Bruce Lee was on the verge of becoming an international superstar on his own terms. He just needed a little more time. Time was the one thing he did not have. Enter the Dragon was scheduled to premiere in Hong Kong on July 26, 1973. In Los Angeles, the premiere was set for August 19th at Grauman's Chinese Theatre. Bruce had done everything required of him. He had proven himself, had created groundbreaking cinema, had shattered every barrier placed before him. The film was in the can, ready to show the world that Bruce Lee had been right all along. But Bruce would never attend either premiere. He would never see audiences react to his masterpiece. He would never know that Enter the Dragon would gross over $400 million worldwide and cement his status as the most influential martial artist in cinema history. On July 20, 1973, 6 days before the Hong Kong premiere, Bruce Lee went to Betty Ting Pei's apartment to discuss Game of Death with producer Raymond Chow. Around 7:30 p.m., he complained of a headache. Betty gave him Equagesic, the same pain reliever he had taken before. Bruce went to lie down. He never woke up. The Dragon had fallen, and the world was about to discover what it had lost. The Dragon's Forge, body as weapon. Before we follow Bruce Lee to his final moments, we must understand the temple he built from flesh and discipline. Bruce's body was not an accident of genetics or a gift from heaven. It was engineered through methodical study and relentless training, a physical manifestation of his martial philosophy. To understand Bruce Lee's impact, you must understand the body that carried it. Bruce stood 5 feet 7 inches tall and typically weighed between 135 and 145 pounds. By conventional measurements, he was small. By any measure of functional capacity, he was extraordinary. His body fat percentage hovered between 3 and 5%, so low that every muscle fiber was visible beneath his skin. When he moved, it was like watching anatomy textbooks come to life, each muscle contracting and releasing with perfect efficiency. But the aesthetics were incidental. Bruce trained for one reason: function. The body had to be a weapon that never failed. His daily routine during his peak years would exhaust most professional athletes. He woke early, often before 6, and went for a run. Not a gentle jog, but 4 to 6 miles at varying paces, incorporating sprints, interval training, and what would later be called high-intensity interval training. He ran with light dumbbells or ankle weights, practicing the heavy hands method of aerobic training decades before it became popular. Running built his cardiovascular base, the foundation that let him maintain explosive speed deep into fights. After running came stretching, at least 30 minutes of flexibility work. Bruce could kick straight up and touch his forehead with his foot, could do full splits in any direction, could move his joints through ranges that seemed anatomically impossible. This flexibility was not for show. It allowed him to generate power from angles his opponents never anticipated, to kick someone 7 feet 2 inches tall in the head, despite being 5'7" himself. He spent years developing this flexibility, treating it with the same seriousness as strength or speed. Weight training came 3 times a week, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. This was revolutionary for martial artists in the 1960s and early 1970s. Traditional martial arts masters believed weight training would make you slow and muscle-bound, would destroy your flexibility and speed. Bruce proved them catastrophically wrong. He studied the science of strength training, understanding that proper training with appropriate volume and intensity would make you faster, more explosive, and more powerful. His weight routine evolved over the years, but eventually settled on a full-body circuit performed in 20-minute sessions. The exercises were compound movements that trained multiple muscle groups simultaneously: clean and press, squats, bench press, barbell curls, good mornings. Bruce typically did 2 sets of 8 reps, which is moderate volume but with perfect form and explosive speed. He also incorporated isometric training, holding positions against immovable resistance, which increased raw strength without adding bulk. His approach predated modern strength and conditioning science, but arrived at many of the same conclusions through experimentation and observation. Bruce paid special attention to his core, training his abdominals every single day. He understood that core strength was the foundation of all power generation, that punches and kicks originated from the midsection, not the limbs. His ab routine varied, but often included hanging leg raises, V-ups, side bends, and isometric holds. He could hold an L-sit indefinitely, could perform dragon flags with weight added. His abdominal development was so extreme that visitors to his school would ask to punch him in the stomach just to feel the solid wall of muscle. Bruce obliged, smiling as their fists bounced off with no effect. Grinding and forearm training occupied a special place in his regimen. Bruce understood that grip strength determined how hard you could punch, how well you could grapple, how effectively you could use weapons. He used wrist rollers, thick bar training, static holds, and farmer's walks decades before grip strength became a focus in modern strength training. His forearms were disproportionately developed, looking massive compared to his slender frame, the product of thousands of hours of focused training. But beyond the structured training, Bruce was always working. He kept workout equipment everywhere, at home, in his office, in his car. He would do impromptu sets of pull-ups on door frames, practice kicks while waiting for food to cook, shadow box between meetings. His friend Chuck Norris famously said that Bruce was either training or thinking about training, that he had never met anyone with that level of dedication. Linda Lee echoed this, saying Bruce would train essentially all day if given the opportunity, fitting multiple sessions into any day. Punished, his diet was equally disciplined. Bruce avoided processed foods, refined flour, and excess sugar. He ate mostly Asian cuisine, rice, vegetables, fish, and moderate amounts of meat. He drank protein shakes made from powdered milk, eggs, and supplements, ensuring adequate protein for muscle recovery and growth. He experimented with vitamin supplementation, taking ginseng, royal jelly, and other nutrients to maintain energy and health. He stayed lean by eating slightly below maintenance calories, carefully tracking his body composition to maintain his fighting weight. In 1970, Bruce suffered a severe back injury that threatened to end his martial arts career. While performing a good morning exercise without warming up, he injured his 4th sacral nerve. Doctors told him he might never practice kung fu again, that he should consider himself lucky if he could walk without pain. Bruce spent 6 months in bed, depressed and frustrated, his body immobilized while his mind raced. During this period, did much of the philosophical writing that would later be published, turning his enforced rest into an opportunity for intellectual growth. But Bruce refused to accept the doctor's verdict. After 6 months, he began his own rehabilitation program, gradually building back his strength and mobility through carefully designed exercises. Within a year, he had recovered completely, his back stronger than before the injury. The experience taught him something important. The body could be rebuilt, limitations could be overcome, and proper training was not just about getting stronger, but about preventing injury and maintaining long-term health. When you watch Bruce Lee on film, performing impossible feats of speed and power, you are watching the result of this obsessive dedication. His 1-inch punch, where he could knock a man back several feet from a distance of 1 inch, was not magic. It was perfect biomechanics, total body coordination, and 10,000 hours of practice compressed into one explosive moment. His 2-finger push-ups were not a trick. They were the product of years of progressive grip training and finger conditioning. His incredible speed, clocked in various tests at faster than human reaction time, came from endless repetitions that made the movements unconscious, from understanding leverage and efficiency, from eliminating every wasted motion. Bruce Lee built his body the way a master craftsman builds a violin, with precision, knowledge, and unwavering attention to every detail. The result was an instrument capable of producing notes nobody else could reach. But instruments, no matter how perfectly crafted, are still subject to the laws of physics and physiology. Push them too hard, maintain them imperfectly, and even the finest instrument can break. Bruce pushed his body harder than perhaps any human body has ever been pushed. For 32 years, it held together. Then, on a hot July evening in Hong Kong, something went catastrophically wrong.
July 20th, 1973, when the dragon fell. Trembling like many others, Bruce woke early in his Hong Kong home, did his morning routine, kissed Linda and the children. He had meetings scheduled, business to attend to, the usual demands of being Bruce Lee. Around midday, he met with George Lazenby, the Australian actor who had played James Bond in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Bruce wanted Lazenby for Game of Death, the film he was developing that would showcase his martial arts philosophy through a series of fights against opponents of increasing difficulty. They discussed the role, the vision, the future. Bruce was excited. Everything was finally coming together. Submerged. After the meeting, Bruce and producer Raymond Chow drove to the apartment of Betty Ting Pei, a Taiwanese actress who was scheduled to appear in Game of Death. Betty was widely believed to be Bruce's mistress, though the exact nature of their relationship remains disputed. They arrived at her apartment around 2 p.m. to discuss the script and the film's direction. The afternoon passed in conversation and planning. The three of them were scheduled to meet Lazenby for dinner later that evening to finalize the deal. Around 7:30 p.m., while still at Betty's apartment, Bruce complained of a headache. It was hot that day, unseasonably hot, with temperatures reaching the high 80s and humidity making the air feel even heavier. Bruce had been feeling the heat, had been working hard, pushing himself as he always did. Betty offered him Equagesic, a pain reliever containing aspirin and meprobamate, a muscle relaxant. Bruce had taken Equagesic before without problems. He swallowed the pill, told them he needed to lie down for a bit, and went to the bedroom to rest. Roofing Chow left the apartment to attend to other business, planning to return later to pick up Bruce for dinner. Betty stayed in the apartment, likely doing household tasks or resting herself. Time passed. Evening turned to night. When Raymond returned around 9 p.m., Betty tried to wake Bruce. He did not respond. She shook him harder. Nothing. Raymond tried. Bruce's body was there, but Bruce was gone. Panic set in. They called Bruce's personal physician, who rushed over and attempted to revive Bruce. Nothing worked. They called an ambulance. Bruce was transported to Queen Elizabeth Hospital, sirens wailing through Hong Kong streets, paramedics working frantically to restart a heart that had already stopped beating. At 11:30 p.m., doctors at Queen Elizabeth Hospital pronounced Bruce Lee dead. The news spread through Hong Kong like wildfire. The television stations interrupted their programming. People poured into the streets, unable to believe what they were hearing. Bruce Lee dead? Impossible. He was 32 years old, in perfect physical condition, the epitome of health and vitality. How could he be dead? The initial reports were confused, contradictory. Some said it was a heart attack. Others mentioned brain swelling. Rumors began immediately. Assassination, drug overdose, curse of the dragon. An autopsy was performed on July 21st. The pathologist, Dr. Donald Tier, was a renowned expert flown in from London specifically to handle this high-profile case. His findings were clear on one point. Bruce's brain had swollen significantly, from a normal 1,400 grams to 1,575 grams, an increase of 12.5%. This cerebral edema had compressed the brain against the skull, causing death. But what caused the edema? That was where the certainty ended and the speculation began. Paycheck of death was listed as death by misadventure, due to hypersensitivity to the exquagesic tablet. The theory was that Bruce had an allergic reaction to one of the ingredients, possibly meprobamate, which caused his brain to swell fatally. But this explanation satisfied few people. Exquagesic was a common medication, and fatal allergic reactions were extremely rare. Bruce had taken it before without incident. Moreover, the typical signs of anaphylactic shock were absent. No swelling of the throat, no hives, no respiratory distress before loss of consciousness. Others pointed to the May 10th incident, when Bruce had collapsed during an ADR session for Enter the Dragon. That episode also involved cerebral edema, but Bruce had recovered after treatment with mannitol. Perhaps whatever caused that first episode had returned more severely. Some doctors suggested heat stroke as the culprit. July 20th, 1973 was the hottest day of the month in Hong Kong, and Bruce had been working hard in the heat. Heat stroke can cause cerebral edema and has killed many athletes in peak condition. This theory gained support in 2018 when biographer Matthew Polly proposed it, noting that Bruce had removed his underarm sweat glands in 1972 to look better on camera, potentially compromising his ability to regulate body temperature. In 2022, a team of medical researchers published a paper in the Clinical Kidney Journal proposing a different theory, hyponatremia. They suggested that Bruce's death was caused by his kidneys' inability to excrete excess water, leading to dangerously low sodium levels in his blood. They pointed to risk factors including Bruce's high water intake, his use of cannabis, which increases thirst, his low-carbohydrate diet, and various medications he was taking. Severe hyponatremia can cause rapid cerebral edema and death within hours. The theory had medical plausibility and accounted for both the May and July incidents. Firefox contains. Some believe the cannabis use was responsible, though medical science finds no link between marijuana and cerebral edema. Others whisper about assassination by jealous martial arts masters or Hong Kong triads angry at Bruce for teaching outsiders. Some invoke the curse of the demons, noting that Brandon Lee, Bruce's son, would die in 1993 at age 28 while filming The Crow, shot by a prop gun that malfunctioned. Father and son, both dying young. Mysterious circumstances. The human mind seeks patterns, seeks reasons when tragedy strikes. The truth is likely mundane and medical rather than mystical or sinister. Bruce Lee pushed his body beyond normal human limits for years. He maintained body fat levels dangerously low for long-term health. He trained with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He had already collapsed once with cerebral edema. His body was sending warnings that he ignored because he had work to do, dreams to fulfill, barriers to break. On July 20th, 1973, his body reached its limit. The exact mechanism, whether heat stroke or hyponatremia or medication reaction or some combination of factors, became academically interesting but ultimately irrelevant. Bruce Lee was dead, and the world had to figure out what to do with that unbearable fact. The world mourns. Hong Kong shut down on July 25, 1973, for Bruce Lee's funeral. More than 25,000 people jammed the streets around the Kowloon funeral parlor, desperate for a final glimpse of the man who had become their hero. Mourners wept openly, unable to process that someone so alive, so powerful, could be gone. Bruce had represented something profound to the people of Hong Kong.
a Chinese man who had conquered the West on his own terms, who had forced Hollywood to acknowledge his worth, who had shown the world that Chinese culture and Chinese people deserved respect. His death felt like a theft, like the universe had taken something before its time. Policing was a blend of traditional Chinese customs and modern celebrity spectacle. Buddhist monks chanted sutras. Incense filled the air. Bruce lay in an open casket, his face peaceful, looking as if he might wake at any moment and flash that confident grin. Among the mourners were Hong Kong's film elite, martial arts masters, government officials, and thousands of ordinary people who had never met Bruce but felt they knew him through his films. They filed past his casket for hours, each paying respects in their own way, each trying to say goodbye to someone who had become larger than life. The media coverage was unprecedented. Newspapers ran special editions. Television stations broadcast hours of coverage. Bruce Lee's death dominated headlines across Asia, then spread worldwide as the magnitude of the loss became clear. In America, the news was initially relegated to entertainment sections, another foreign film star dying young. But as Enter the Dragon's American release approached, as word spread about what Bruce Lee had meant and what he had accomplished, the coverage intensified. This was not just another celebrity death, this was the loss of someone who had changed cinema, martial arts, and Asian representation in Western media. On July 30th, Bruce's body was flown to Seattle for a second, more intimate funeral. Linda wanted Bruce buried in Seattle, the city where they had fallen in love, where their life together had begun, where Bruce had started to develop the philosophy and skills that would make him legendary. The funeral at Butterworth Funeral Home was attended by family, close friends, and students. Steve McQueen, James Coburn, Dan Inosanto, Taki Kimura, Peter Chin, and Bruce's brother Robert served as pallbearers, carrying the casket to the hearse. They buried Bruce at Lakeview Cemetery on Capitol Hill, overlooking the city where his American journey had begun 14 years earlier. Linda chose a simple headstone marked with the yin-yang symbol, the Taoist representation of balance and harmony that had been central to Bruce's philosophy. The inscription read, Bruce Lee, November 27th, 1940, July 20th, 1973, founder of Jeet Kune Do. No flowery epitaphs, no grand declarations, just the facts of his life and his contribution. It seemed fitting for a man who valued simplicity and directness, who had always preferred action to words. Condemned as Bruce's death, Enter the Dragon premiered in Hong Kong as scheduled. The theatres were packed, audiences equal parts devastated and eager to see Bruce's final, completed performance. As the film unfolded, as Bruce moved across the screen with his impossible speed and grace, the audience's grief transformed into something else. Pride, gratitude, awe. They were watching a master at the peak of his powers, knowing they would never see anything like it again. When the film ended, the applause lasted for minutes. People standing and clapping, not just for the film, but for the man, for everything he had represented and accomplished. On August 19th, Enter the Dragon opened in Los Angeles at Grauman's Chinese Theatre, the premiere Bruce had been scheduled to attend. Warner Brothers had debated whether to cancel or postpone, but they decided Bruce would have wanted the film to be seen. The theatre was filled with industry people, celebrities, martial artists, and fans. When Bruce's face first appeared on screen, moving through the opening sparring sequence with such fluidity and power, the audience held its collective breath. For the next 99 minutes, they watched Bruce Lee show Hollywood everything they had rejected, everything they had said would not work, everything they had been wrong about. The film was not just a success, it was a phenomenon. Enter the Dragon went on to gross over $20 million in the United States alone, beating out films starring Steve McQueen and other major American stars. Worldwide, it earned over $400 million, making it one of the highest-grossing films of 1973 and the most successful martial arts film ever made. Adjusted for inflation, that figure exceeds $2 billion in 2024 money. Warner Brothers had gambled $850,000 on Bruce Lee. He had repaid them beyond their wildest projections. The cruel irony was that Bruce never knew. He died believing Enter the Dragon would succeed, but he never saw the proof. He never got to enjoy the vindication he had earned. The loss reverberated through the entertainment industry. Directors who had worked with Bruce spoke about his genius, his dedication, his vision. Actors who had studied under him talked about his teaching, his philosophy, his impact on their understanding of movement and performance. Martial artists worldwide mourned one of their greatest champions. But perhaps the deepest grief belonged to those who had never met Bruce, but had seen themselves reflected in him for the first time. Asian Americans, Asian immigrants, people of color who had watched Bruce kick down doors and demand respect, proving that barriers were meant to be broken. His death at 32 seemed impossibly young, a cruel truncation of a life that had already accomplished so much, but promised so much more. Brandon was 8 years old, Shannon was 4. They would grow up with a father they barely remembered, but whose shadow would follow them forever. Linda was 38, suddenly a widow responsible for preserving and protecting her husband's legacy. The world had lost Bruce Lee. But what Bruce had created, what he had proven, what he had started, that could not die. The dragon had fallen, but the flame he lit continued to burn. The Eternal Dragon. Legacy Beyond Death. 50 years after Bruce Lee's death, his influence permeates global culture in ways that would have seemed impossible in 1973. He appears on T-shirts in remote villages, his image recognized in countries where his films never played in theaters. He exists as a cultural symbol that transcends his actual life and work, representing ideas larger than any single person could embody. Understanding Bruce Lee's legacy requires understanding that he became several things simultaneously. A martial artist who revolutionized combat sports, an actor who broke racial barriers, a philosopher whose teachings spread beyond martial arts, and an icon whose image represents strength, determination, and the refusal to accept limitations. Start with martial arts. In 2004, UFC President Dana White called Bruce Lee the father of mixed martial arts, and he was not exaggerating for effect. Bruce's philosophy of cross-training, of taking techniques from multiple disciplines and integrating them into a coherent fighting system, is exactly what MMA practitioners do. When you watch a UFC fighter smoothly transition from boxing to Muay Thai kicks, to wrestling takedowns, to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu submissions, you are watching Jeet Kune Do in action, even if the fighter has never formally studied Bruce's system. The idea that a complete fighter must be effective at all ranges of combat, must adapt to any style, must remain formless and flexible. These are Bruce's ideas made flesh. Seizing UFC champions openly cite Bruce as inspiration. Anderson Silva, one of the greatest fighters in MMA history, studied Bruce's films obsessively, incorporating his movement patterns and philosophy into his own style. Georges St-Pierre credits Bruce with showing him that martial arts was not about rigidly following one system, but about constant evolution and adaptation. John Jones, another all-time great, uses techniques Bruce popularized, like the oblique kick to the knee. These fighters, and countless others, see themselves as carrying forward what Bruce started. The idea that fighting should be practical, efficient, and constantly evolving, rather than bound by tradition. Bruce's impact on martial arts extends beyond MMA. Traditional martial arts schools worldwide modified their teaching because of him. The rigid formalism that Bruce criticized began to loosen. More schools started incorporating sparring and practical application rather than just forms. The concept of cross-training, which was heretical when Bruce proposed it in the 1960s, became standard practice. Martial artists began studying biomechanics, kinesiology, sports science, applying Bruce's interdisciplinary approach to understanding combat. Even traditional Wing Chun, the art Bruce learned from Yip Man, evolved in response to his criticisms, with many schools adding more emphasis on practical application and less on rote forms. In cinema, Bruce's legacy is equally profound. Before Bruce, martial arts films existed primarily in Asian markets. After Bruce, martial arts became a global genre. The kung fu explosion of the 1970s was directly triggered by Enter the Dragon's success. Hollywood suddenly wanted martial arts films, martial arts television shows, martial arts everything. This opened doors for Jackie Chan, who built his career on combining Bruce's martial arts with his own comedic sensibility. It paved the way for Jet Li, Donnie Yen, Michelle Yeoh, and countless other Asian action stars who found international success in ways that would have been impossible before Bruce broke through. But more importantly, Bruce changed what an Asian man could be on screen. Before Bruce, Asian male characters in American entertainment were limited to a few stereotypes. The sinister Fu Manchu villain, the emasculated Charlie Chan detective, the comic relief houseboy. Asian men were never heroes, never romantic leads, never powerful or sexual or dangerous in the way white male actors were allowed to be. Bruce shattered that entire framework. He was a hero, a sex symbol, a physical specimen who made audiences of all races see Asian men differently. He proved that Asian actors could carry films, could open movies, could be leading men. The impact on Asian American identity cannot be overstated. For generations of Asian Americans growing up in the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s, Bruce Lee was often the only Asian hero they saw in mainstream media. He was proof that they were not limited to the roles society tried to impose on them, that they could be strong, confident, powerful. Countless Asian Americans cite Bruce as the reason they studied martial arts, went into entertainment, or simply carried themselves with more confidence. He gave them permission to take up space, to be seen, to refuse the model minority stereotype that tried to make them invisible. But Bruce's influence spread beyond the Asian community. In African American communities, Bruce Lee was second only to Muhammad Ali in popularity during the 1970s. Hip-hop culture embraced him enthusiastically. The Wu-Tang Clan named their landmark debut album Enter the Wu-Tang, 36 Chambers, in direct homage to Bruce's final film, incorporating kung fu movie samples throughout their music. Rappers from LL Cool J to Kendrick Lamar reference Bruce in their lyrics. Why? Because Bruce represented something universal. The outsider who refused to accept society's limitations, who fought the system and won through skill and determination. Bruce's story resonated with anyone who had been told they could not achieve their dreams because of who they were or where they came from. The philosophical influence extends furthest of all. Be like water has become a cultural touchstone, advice repeated in boardrooms and yoga studios and self-help books. Bruce's emphasis on constant adaptation, on removing what is useless and adding what is your own, on transcending rigid systems, these ideas have applications far beyond martial arts. Entrepreneurs cite Bruce when talking about pivoting business strategies. Artists reference him when discussing creative processes. Athletes invoke him when explaining their training philosophy. Bruce's ideas about self-actualization, about becoming your best self through honest self-expression, have been absorbed into Western personal development culture in ways that rarely acknowledge the source but carry his influence nonetheless. Even his visual image has become iconic in ways that few people achieve. The yellow tracksuit from Game of Death is instantly recognizable decades later. Uma Thurman wore it in Kill Bill as explicit homage. The image of Bruce in a fighting stance, nunchucks in hand, appears on everything from t-shirts to street art to tattoos. Statues of Bruce stand in Hong Kong, Los Angeles, Seattle, and, bizarrely, in Mostar, Bosnia and Herzegovina, where residents erected it as a symbol of unity in a city torn by ethnic conflict. They chose Bruce because he transcended ethnic divisions, represented universal values rather than particular tribal loyalties. In video games, Bruce's influence is everywhere. Street Fighter, the game that defined the fighting game genre, was directly inspired by Bruce's films. The character Liu Kang in Mortal Kombat is explicitly modeled after Bruce. Countless other games feature Bruce-inspired characters or mechanics. He even appears as a playable character in EA Sports UFC games, his virtual avatar allowing new generations to experience a version of his fighting prowess. In 2024, Bruce Lee remains relevant to teenagers who were not born until decades after his death, his influence passed down through cultural channels he could never have predicted. His family has worked to preserve and expand his legacy. Shannon Lee, Bruce's daughter, runs the Bruce Lee Foundation and has been vocal in protecting her father's image and teaching. She has spoken about the racism Bruce faced, the barriers he broke, and the lessons his life offers today. In 2022, it was announced that Ang Lee would direct a biographical film about Bruce, with Ang Lee's son Mason playing the lead. The project signals that Bruce's story remains relevant, that new generations need to understand what he accomplished and what he represents. Redhead is that Bruce accomplished all of this in 32 years. Consider what might have been if he had lived to 60, 70, 80 years old. What films would he have directed? What philosophical works would he have written? How would martial arts have evolved with his continued influence? What roles would he have played as he aged, perhaps mentoring a new generation on screen as he had off-screen? We will never know. But what he accomplished in his brief time changed the world permanently. Bruce Lee proved that one person, refusing to accept limitations, could bend an entire culture toward justice. He showed that barriers were not immutable facts, but human, constructions that could be demolished through skill, determination, and unwavering self-belief. He demonstrated that Asian people, people of color, anyone told they were not good enough or not right for the role, could force the world to see them differently. He did not ask for permission, he took what he deserved, and in doing so, he opened doors for everyone who came after. Epilogue. Be water, my friend. On Capitol Hill in Seattle, on a hillside overlooking the city where he became himself, Bruce Lee rests beneath a simple headstone. Visitors leave flowers, leave notes, leave small offerings of gratitude. His grave is next to his son Brandon's, the two dragons reunited in death after Brandon's own tragic early departure in 1993. Together they watch over Seattle, the city that gave Bruce his second chance, his fresh start, his platform to become legendary. If you visit that grave, you might hear the wind moving through the trees, and if you listen carefully, you might imagine it carries Bruce's voice, still teaching, still pushing people to become their best selves. Because Bruce Lee's death did not silence him. His philosophy, his approach to life and martial arts, continues to echo through every practitioner who seeks efficiency, every fighter who cross-trains, every person who refuses to be limited by systems others built. The emptiness Bruce spoke about, the empty cup that must be filled before you can learn, is not void. It is potential. It is the space where transformation happens, where the rigid becomes fluid, where limitations dissolve. Bruce understood that the highest level of mastery was not accumulating more techniques, but transcending technique entirely, responding to reality directly rather than filtering everything through predetermined patterns. This applies to martial arts. It applies to life. Forging you must be shapeless, formless, like water, Bruce said in that famous interview, gesticulating with his hands to convey the concept his words could only approximate. When you pour water in a cup, it becomes the cup. When you pour water in a bottle, it becomes the bottle. When you pour water in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Water can drip and it can crash. Become like water, my friend. This was not mystical nonsense or fortune cookie wisdom. It was practical advice for navigating a complex, changing world. Do not be so rigid that circumstances break you. Do not be so formless that you lose yourself. Maintain your essential nature while adapting to whatever container life places you in. Flow around obstacles. Wear down resistance through persistence. Be powerful enough to crash and gentle enough to nourish. Be water. Washington III's was enough to change everything. Bruce Lee demonstrated what human potential could achieve when freed from artificial constraints. He showed that limits were often illusions, that barriers were temporary, that one person with enough determination and skill could shift entire cultures. He did not do this through violence, though his films were violent. He did this through art, through excellence, through refusing to accept no when he knew the answer should be yes. Wildfire's children carry his torch forward. Shannon Lee speaks about his philosophy, his approach to life, his relevance to modern challenges. She reminds audiences that Bruce was not just a martial artist or an actor, but a fully realized human being who happened to express himself through those mediums. She preserves his writings, his teaching, his legacy. Brandon, before his death, showed flashes of his father's charisma and skill, suggesting what might have been if the Lee family had not been twice touched by tragedy. But Bruce's legacy does not depend on his family alone. It lives in every martial artist who questions their training, who seeks to understand rather than just memorize. It lives in every actor who demands better roles, who refuses to be limited by race or background. It lives in every person who hears, "You can't," and responds, "Watch me." Bruce Lee planted seeds that continue to grow, ideas that continue to spread, inspiration that continues to motivate people who never met him, who were born after he died, who know him only through images and words and the ripples he left in culture. In Hong Kong, people still visit his statue on the Avenue of Stars, still pose for pictures with this bronze echo of a man who moved like lightning. In Los Angeles, tourists find his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame and remember that he earned his place there, despite every obstacle Hollywood placed in his path. In dojos and gyms worldwide, students practice techniques he taught, philosophy he articulated, approaches to training he pioneered. The dragon did not die. The dragon transformed into something larger than flesh, into an idea that cannot be killed. If there is a lesson in Bruce Lee's life, it is this. You are not your circumstances. You are not limited by where you were born, what you look like, what others tell you about your potential. You are defined by what you choose to become, by the work you put in, by your willingness to challenge every assumption about what is possible. Bruce Lee was born in San Francisco, raised in Hong Kong, rejected by Hollywood, embraced by Asia, and finally recognized as a global icon only after death. His path was not straight. His journey was not easy. But he never stopped moving forward, never stopped adapting, never stopped becoming. A goal is not always meant to be reached, Bruce once said. It often serves simply as something to aim at. He was aiming at excellence, at full self-expression, at breaking down every barrier between who he was and who he could become. He was 32 years old when he died. He had been aiming his entire life, and though he never reached the ultimate destination, because no one ever does, he traveled further than most people could imagine possible. He showed us the way. Now it is up to us to keep walking that path, to keep breaking barriers, to keep becoming more fully ourselves. The dragon is dead. Long live the dragon. Be water, my friend.